Great. Committee, we'll go ahead and get started then. It's a little late for bill introductions, so I don't think we have any. Approval of the committee minutes. We do have a quorum since we have, how many senators do we have online? 3? Okay. Is it, would you guys acknowledge so that we know Senator Holland?
I'm here.
Hold on just a second. I'm going to get the IT person. We're having a little bit of difficulty in here. Would anybody online, would you please turn off, mute yourself? There's an echo in the room. Okay, thank you. So who do we have online?
Senators Baumgardner, Holland, and Corson are all online.
Thank you, Eddie. And we will be asking you to vote today too. So committee, the minutes were emailed out. John sent them out. We have January 13th, 18th, 27th, February 8th, 9th, 11th, 17th, and 21st. Committee, what are your wishes on the minutes? Do I have a motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you, Senator Baumgardner. It's been moved by Senator Baumgardner, seconded by Senator Peck. Discussion on the motion to approve the minutes? Hearing none, seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you, committee. Committee will open the hearing on SCR 1620. Amelia, will you give us an overview?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Concurrent Resolution number 1620 relates to taxation and would propose to amend Article 11 of the Kansas Constitution by adding a new Section 14. The resolution proposes a new section that would require, on and after July 1st of 2023, a supermajority of 2/3 of all members of the House of Representatives and Senate to pass bills that enact or amend any law creating any new state tax or increasing the rate of existing state income tax, sales tax, compensating use tax, other excise tax, property tax, estate or inheritance tax, or any tax in the nature of these taxes. The proposed amendment would be submitted to the electors at the November 22 general election unless a special election is called at a sooner date.
Committee, any questions? Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a pretty broad definition of tax, but I want to, I guess, question that again a little bit further. Take, for example, a $4 fee attached to, the motor vehicle licensing type issue. Is there any need for any further additional description or definition to cover any of that? Again, I just bring it up as a question. I don't know what beyond that would be an example of something that was increased or added that wasn't a, quote, tax in some formality. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Solentrop. Amelia?
I think I would like to do a little more research. I believe there has been a Kansas Supreme Court case relating to the definition of taxes, and so I'd like to review that.
Okay, thank you. And maybe we could bring that back this afternoon at noon. Are there any other questions for Amelia? I think that's an excellent question. I know there was discussion on that earlier. on this, and maybe we would add to that the definition of tax fees. And I know that, or I've been told, I don't know, this was based off of another state's model legislation. Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would not want to delay the passage of the bill or completion of this issue because of that, but I just wanted to inquire. Thank
No,
you.
I think we absolutely should explore it. And depending on how the hearing goes, we are having a meeting this afternoon, and I hope to bring this topic up this afternoon. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The legislation passes 2/3 majority, both chambers, to increase taxes. The governor can still veto the legislation, correct?
Amelia? Would you like to research
I
that
will.
and get back to us? Okay. I think the way it's written, it probably does, but we will confirm that. Senator Peck.
While you're doing research, which I would presume that the governor could veto it, and then it would just be, if that's the case, then it would just be the regular process. 2/3 would need to vote to override the veto. So if it was just in the Senate, a 27 vote to pass a tax increase, one senator changed their mind and decided not to override the veto would stand. And don't have to answer that right now, but those are questions I'd like for us to be aware of. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for Amelia? Any online? Hearing none, seeing none. Thank you, Amelia. Committee, our first proponent is Elizabeth Patton, Americans for Prosperity. Elizabeth, are you online?
Hi.
Good
I am
morning.
online. Can you hear me? Good morning. I'm online today. Excuse me, my children are home from school, so I'm going to acknowledge ahead of time the possibility for some background noise during my testimony. So hopefully that does not happen. But in the meantime, thank you for the opportunity to address committee this morning. My name is Elizabeth Patton. I am the State Director for Americans for Prosperity Kansas. Really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this issue. When we think about Kansas state spending and that it's increased by nearly 55% in the last decade or so, and we see the excess revenue our state has, it becomes imperative, in my view, that we refrain from being beholden as a state to a simple tax and spend culture or head down that road, and instead help make sure that we are thoughtful and efficient when we govern. When we speak with Kansans daily, their top concern is the tax burden, and their top worry is that tax burden growing, and they are feeling the effects of inflation, and they want to be certain that they have a government who is careful and intentional with their hard-earned money. We all know Kansans work hard for their money, and it is just beyond necessary that we never take the decision lightly to raise their taxes. In my view, SER 1620 helps Kansas be smarter, intentional, and more efficient without ceding their core functions. It simply requires a supermajority vote of 2/3 from both houses of the legislature when considering legislation to create a new tax or increase the rates of various existing taxes. I'm anxious to hear what the revisor says in her research. Our reading of it, my reading of it when I was preparing this testimony, was that it does not cover fees, but I would be interested to know her thoughts there at the appropriate time. But SCR would encourage legislators to consider more effective and efficient spending strategies as well to achieve state responsibilities. So in my view, a lower and more stable tax rate is also crucial for our state to remain competitive with nearby states for both individuals and businesses, ensuring that Kansas can be an attractive place to raise a family, start and run a business, to retire, and to live otherwise. We're not going to be a state that is consistently on an upward trajectory. The amendment would continue to allow Kansas to raise, in our view, more than enough revenue for the core beneficial activities of state governments. We believe that some tax bases could be broader, and there are many opportunities for improvement long-term in our state tax code. But I believe raising rates should always be the last resort, because economic damage can easily occur with each incremental rate increase. So I thank you again for the opportunity to testify on this very important piece of legislation that I believe not only protects Kansans, but also protects our state government and ensures some long-term fiscal responsibility for our state's future. I believe it's an incredible opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify. I would be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think some of us might be envious that you're home with the family. But thank you for taking the time to testify. Committee, any questions for Elizabeth? Seeing none, thank you. Our next conferee, Eric Stafford.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Kansas Chamber, here today. Appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of SCR 1620. I'm really focusing from our testimony on the standpoint of just looking at historical tax rates and then wanting to highlight that this isn't an uncommon idea. There's 15 states, just in some research that I've done, that have some form of more than just a simple majority requirement for a tax increase. Arizona is 2/3, Arkansas is 3/4, but then that is only applicable to it's all taxes except sales and alcohol. So, but there's a variety of standards that they have in place. Florida's 2/3, Delaware is 3/5, some are 3/4. But this isn't a new, or Kansas wouldn't be the only state to do this. But again, highlighting in our written comments about what is our tax burden for the state of Kansas, and we've talked about that before in this committee numerous times. But again, just wanted to draw your attention to the history of tax rates in the state. Those information that was pulled from, I think it was the Legislative Research Tax Facts documents that are available online through the legislative website that we found. So, but ultimately, this encourages the legislature to consider cuts in spending versus automatically looking to raise taxes when faced with tough budget situations. We appreciate your efforts so far this year and discussions about looking to pay down debts and wanting to pursue tax policy, but in a responsible manner that helps protect in the future, just based with all the uncertainty going on in the world events today. So happy to be here to answer questions at the appropriate time, but appreciate the opportunity, Madam Chair, to speak in support of this amendment.
Thank you, Eric. Senator Solontrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here today, Eric. Question in regard to, let's just say, income tax. Let's say we've got a 2-bracket tax system, and we wanted to lower the overall tax rate. So it's reduced for the upper bracket, but it perhaps may raise taxes for a few at the lower end. Is that considered a tax increase, or how do we calculate the net revenue stream and make a determination that we are only either equaling the tax revenue stream or we're below? How would that apply? Thank you.
Appreciate your question, Senator. The way this reads is it's amending laws creating new state taxes or increasing the rate of existing state taxes. But then in the subject line, it's new or increased state taxes. So even though if you might go to like a flat rate, but it's reducing revenue, I don't know how you can argue that that's a tax increase if the revenue's going down. I mean, 328's Senate Bill 328 is a good example. That's, if I recall, 4.75 on all income. Is it higher than the first 3% on your income? Yes, but it's an overall revenue reduction to the state. But it's a cut on my 5.7% that I'm paying on everything over 60,000. So.
Yes, Senator Solontrop, and I do plan, the committee's going to have a hearing on Senate Bill 328 next week. So maybe we should get that passed before we pass this constitutional amendment. Senator Solontrop. Senator Solontrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Somehow I'd like to reach a consensus, either with an amendment to the bill for clarity or something along those lines so that we don't run into those situations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We'll get with Amelia. Any other questions for Eric? Any online? Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Committee, we have written testimony from Dave Trobert. Is there anybody else that would like to testify for the bill? Seeing none. Opponents? Emily Fetch, Kansas Action for Children. Are you online? Emily?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me? Thank you,
You may-
Chairwoman. Thank you, Chairwoman Tyson and members of the committee to have the opportunity to provide testimony in opposition to SCR 1620. We oppose this resolution because a constitutional amendment like SCR 1620 limits the choices that we can make as a state. A constitutional amendment will make it difficult for lawmakers to respond to constituent needs and honor the democratic process. Current lawmakers are not the only ones impacted by this taking away of their authority. This policy would tie the hands of future lawmakers and make it harder for them to make choices in the best interest of the state. Policies like 1620 can be harmful during unexpected events like recessions, natural disasters, pandemics, or terrorist actions. Limiting our future options now, when federal stimulus, rising inflation, and uncertain pandemic impacts have contributed to the current revenue surplus, could lead the state to experience more acute fiscal crises later when those one-time funds end. The legislature will likely be dealing with these shifting dynamics in our revenue systems and budget needs in the next few years. The restrictions of SCR 1620 would propose to Kansas voters hinders the legislature's ability to make effective policy decisions in these turbulent times. Other states who have similar tax and expenditure caps and restrictions have experienced negative consequences in the years following the implementation of these policies. A related policy that has been in place in Colorado for several years, and their legislature has found it difficult to respond to the changes that their state has seen since. A constitutional amendment is something that would be a near permanent decision we'd have to deal with for decades to come. We ask for you not to support SCR 1620 and instead retain your current processes for passing legislation related to revenue systems. Thank you, and I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Emily. Committee, any questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In the written testimony that we were provided, there is a comment on your letterhead. I don't know how to tell you what page it is. It's not page 1, 2. I guess I'd call it page 3. The quote is, "Kansas still has not recovered from previous disinvestment, and there is a long list of unmet needs." What would be your definition of recovering from the previous disinvestment? We have nearly $3 billion surplus in the state budget right now. The legislature in 2017 passed the largest in history tax increase, by the way, with 2/3 majority vote. So again, the question would be, what would be your definition of having recovered from the previous disinvestment?
Chairman Tyson, may I respond?
Oh, yes, Emily, please proceed.
Thank you for the question. I agree with you that right now Kansas looks to be in a good revenue position with the surplus. However, there have been, continued things. Some of the changes that were made in the 2012-2013 tax changes have not been fully reinstated. Things like tax credits, that sort of thing. Another piece is, there was a lot of understaffing in government agencies, hiring freezes, that sort of thing, that have not been fully restored. And as you can see in the list of bullets in that section that you mentioned, those are a lot of the things that I'm meaning by unmet needs that still, I think we would like to see restored, to see fully funded, and, things like that 9.5 years long waiting list for the IDD waiver. I mean, that is something that is fixable with additional investment.
Thank you, Emily. Committee, any other questions? Thank you for your testimony. Committee, next up is Travis Lowe. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Travis Lowe from the Braden Heidner Lowe & Associates firm, here today representing Economic Lifelines. Economic Lifelines is a coalition of private businesses, trade associations, local chambers of commerce, and local units of government here in Kansas that share the desire for transportation investment in the state. And transportation is the purpose of our testimony this morning. We are not here to advocate on the philosophy of general revenues in that system here in Kansas. We just want to bring the attention to of the committee as it pertains to transportation. As you know, a portion of the motor fuel tax is a constitutionally protected source that goes to the state highway fund. Admittingly, that rate has changed since its first enactment in 1925. We are not here today to ask for an increase in the fuel tax, but this touches on a larger conversation our industry is having right now and what the future of transportation investment tax looks like. There's conversations across the nation under this dome on what the funding streams will look like as we know the vehicle fleet is changing and what it looks like in a state with Kansas with a heavy concentration of both urban and rural roads. The Department of Transportation here in Kansas is leading a road usage study. I believe it's one of the first ones in our region to try to answer some of those questions. And we know a lot of legislators on both sides of the rotunda, both sides of the aisle have ideas, and we're really excited to explore that to see what that'll look like in the next 20 years. We are a little concerned, though, if this includes transportation, what type of flexibility would we have to enact that if we have to change our reliant funding streams? And Madam Chair, I'll probably stop right there and ask for any questions.
Thank you, Travis. Senator Suellentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have you looked or considered anything for electric vehicles on use of our highways? Got
yes,
any
those conversations
proposals that are kind of universal or being used in our region that we could make some decisions on?
Yes, sir, Senator. We know those types of ideas are certainly out there. We're having those conversations. We're happy to explore those ideas. And I'm not an expert on the bill. I don't know that fees are included in this. So there are all types of different ways to generate revenue, to keep the transportation fund revenue neutral, so to speak. So we're happy to consider all those types of items on the table.
Senator Suellentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be happy to see you bring some of those forward rather quickly. Again, I'm wondering if an application to those type of vehicles that would be equal to a gas tax for a combustion engine vehicle would be considered raising taxes as opposed to more so equalizing taxes for those transportation vehicles using the highway. So again, I think there might be a question about whether that is actually in effect raising taxes or not. I would ask somebody to find that out. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Travis? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got the bill here, front and back of one page. I've read it, and I'm sorry, you're testifying in opposition to Senate Concurrent Resolution 1620. I don't see anywhere on here where it reduces highway funding or restricts your ability to construct highways. Can you help me understand how this would reduce highway funding?
Yes, sir. Our testimony is not implying that this proposed constitutional amendment as written would reduce highway funding at this time. Our concern is that as the conversation of how to keep highway funding at revenue neutral the next 20 years with the declining revenue source, most sources believe that the reliance on a motor fuel tax, so to speak, will shift over the coming 2 decades. And so if there are alternatives, we don't have a position on what those alternatives would be at the moment, but we know the conversation will take place. And if it points to 1 or 2 things that maybe the Department of Transportation suggests, maybe legislators here suggest, maybe our neighboring states have implemented, if this makes that difficult to implement, that was where our concern would be.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the last massive tax increase that passed the legislature in 2017, would it have met this criteria?
2017, I believe so.
You're correct. It would have. And
Sir, yes, sir.
thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Peck, I'm sorry, but I think 15 and 17, the two largest tax increases ever seen in the state of Kansas, both passed by 2/3 majority and admittedly not coming out of this committee, but they did pass the legislature by supermajority. So they would have met this threshold. But thank you for your testimony
Yes, ma'am.
and
Thank
your
you, Madam Chair.
comments. Yeah. Any other questions for Travis? Seeing none, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. Our next conferee is Michael White.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Michael White, the Executive Director of the Kansas Contractors Association, and I am here today to appear in opposition to SCR 1620. A little bit of what Travis said, but I want to just say that as we look at this as a board, and I review this legislation with my board, we do have, it's not declining currently, the motor fuels tax, but we know as all the major automakers are moving to electric fleets, that will decline over time. And so if this goes into place, we know the mix of our funding is going to change over the next, probably not the short term. This is more of a long-term situation, but at some point, our revenues will have to change, the mix that we have. And 2 years ago, when you passed the Ike plan, you did that without any tax increase. There was no tax increase at that time to pass the Ike plan. So our concern is, with this type of legislation in place, a constitutional amendment for 2/3 requirement, that's a pretty large threshold. We've seen in other states that have thresholds that it can become very difficult, and usually transportation is the one area that sees the reductions in funding. You know, I think there was some mention of Colorado and other states, but the reality is in certain situations, and I've included with my one-page testimony some research, but typically we see in other states that the transportation funds are where they're reduced to make up budget gaps. So the only other point I would make in terms of when you look at our state budget, we have, you know, constitutionally protected funding. We have some funding that requires a federal match. And so when you really look at the ability for you guys as policymakers to really impact the budget at times, we're talking about 20% or less of that. So the concern is over time, if the revenues decline that support the transportation plan, if those decline, we can't get that threshold met of 2/3 to pass a new fee, tax, whatever it may be. Your only options as policymakers and policymakers in the future is going to be to cut the budgets or transfer money out of the transportation fund. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Michael. I want to correct myself. I did say that 2015 was supermajority. It felt like supermajority. It was not. The governor signed that into law with majority. And then in 2017, the original bill did not pass with supermajority. However, the veto override was supermajority. So just so everybody knows the accuracy on that.
I wasn't sure what the votes were.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it was a little painful process. Yeah. So, committee, any questions? Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here today. You know, we're looking at electric vehicles in the near term. In your discussions with contractors around the country and those even in the production of transportation vehicles, is there anything on the drawing board that wouldn't necessarily use the highways or the roads for transportation?
I wouldn't use the roads.
Low-flying vehicles or anything of that nature?
Boy, that's way out there. I can't say that I have been a part of any kind of conversations around that kind of technology.
You may not see it then, okay.
Right. So, but to your point earlier, Senator, and it is not lost on any of us in the industry that at some point, you know, we passed the electric vehicle registration fee, increased that a couple years ago. Clearly, as we move forward, those are the types of things we're going to have to look at. How do we raise revenues? And we can say that discussion for another day, but that is clearly where we're headed and how we're going to pay for that. It's just, I'm guessing it's a good 10 to 15 years off before there's really, you know, concrete what we're going to do. And maybe not that far, but it's still a few years out there.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. White, you make a couple bolded comments on your written testimony. It says transportation funding is based on future declining revenue source. I realize that fuel tax may be going down if we get into the electric vehicles. However, sales tax collections keep rising, and since transportation automatically receives 16+% of sales tax, as sales tax increases, that would mean that highway funding automatically increases. And then you also said SCR 1620 further limits the legislature's flexibility to determine funding priorities. I don't understand that statement at all. The legislature's got all kinds of flexibility to determine funding priorities. Can you help me with those two bolded comments in your written testimony?
So, I mean, in terms of the funding, I think we agree that the motor fuels tax is going to at some point be a declining revenue source. Sales tax fluctuates. We're clearly in an uphill climb right now. I don't disagree that it's not declining, but those revenues change all the time. And so at some point, those fluctuate. And so I think the thing I would say about sales tax is at some point, if we don't do something like what Senator Solentrup was talking about, find another revenue source, I don't stand here today thinking that the legislature is going to want to put more and more sales tax to help fund transportation long term. And that's, you know, something we got to think about. And so I agree with you that it's not currently declining, but it can decline year to year. It doesn't always increase. And I think the appetite of the legislature will probably be not to increase their support of transportation through sales tax. That's just my long term, because there's going to be a lot more pressures on the budget with sales tax over time. That's what I would say, and I think that's what my board would say. So it fluctuates some on the sales tax. I can't stand here and say it's declining, but it certainly can fluctuate in long term. I don't think we're going to spend more sales tax for transportation in the state. In terms of the budget, the piece that we point out in the budget is simply when you take in consideration the part of the budget that's either constitutionally protected or has a federal mandate that you have to match as a legislature to draw those federal dollars down like caseloads. That leaves a very small percentage. I think our testimony says 22% of the budget for other things like transportation, higher ed, community mental health, whatever the case may be. And if the revenue pie shrinks over time or during a recession, then those areas are going to have to, you got to maintain those levels of funding. And so that piece that the rest of us are in will shrink up, in our opinion. Or you end up transferring money like we've done previously from the highway fund over to the state general fund to meet those expenditures. That's what we mean by that statement.
Senator Peck, did you have a follow-up? Okay. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes. Committee, I draw your attention to the opponents, American Council of Engineering Companies of Kansas, Tim Graham, John Jenks, Scott Rothschild, Kevin Walker. Is there anybody else that would like to testify as an opponent? Any neutral testimony? If not, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 543. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you guys, I'm getting ahead of myself. we'll close the hearing on the Senate Resolution 41620. We'll close that hearing. We're going to open the hearing now on Senate Bill 543. I'm changing the order a little bit. We have a conferee that needs to drop offline. So Amelia, will you give us an overview? Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 543 relates to Kansas adjusted gross income. We're talking about state income tax, and would provide a subtraction modification to allow the carry forward of certain net operating losses for individuals. If you're following along in the bill itself, the new language is actually found on page 10, if you're looking for it. The bill would amend KSA 7932-117C to allow the subtraction from federal adjusted gross income for taxable years beginning after December 31st of 2017 for an individual taxpayer who carried back federal net operating losses arising in a taxable year beginning after December 31, 2017 and before January 1 of 2021 pursuant to Section 172B1 of the Internal Revenue Code as it was amended by the CARES Act. The amount of such federal net operating loss carryback for the applicable year is the amount of the subtraction modification. If the amount of such federal net operating loss carryback exceeds the taxpayer's Kansas adjusted gross income for that taxable year, the amount that exceeds the Kansas adjusted gross income may be carried forward as a subtraction modification in the following taxable year or years until the total amount has been deducted, except that no unused amount shall be carried forward for more than 20 years. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Kevin, are you online? Committee, we may have lost Kevin Accord. Committee, I'll draw you to your attention to his written testimony. It's in your folder. Are there anybody that would like to testify for the bill? Anybody opposition on the bill? Any neutral on the bill? Seeing none, committee, I would draw your attention to the reason that we have this bill. What happened were some changes in federal law and state law where they did not sync up for a time, and there were businesses that had losses and they were not allowed to carry forward those losses. So this is an attempt to allow those taxpayers to not pay income tax on those losses. With that, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 543. Committee will open the hearing on Senate Bill 495. Amelia, do you mind giving us an overview?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 495 relates to income tax deductions and would establish the Salt Parity Act to allow pass-through entities to elect to pay state income tax at the entity level beginning with tax year 2022. New Section 1 provides that Sections 1 through 6 shall be known as the Salt Parity Act and declares that the deductibility of state income taxes should be the same for C corporations, S corporations, and partnerships. And as a little background, which possibly some proponents may be able to discuss in more detail, This relates to the state and local tax deduction amendment that was made in the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. So this is in response to that federal amendment.
Thank you, Amelia.
Sure. New Section 2 provides definitions for purposes of the Act. One of the ones that you will see throughout here that's important to understand is that electing pass-through entity means an S corporation or partnership that has made the election pursuant to this new Act. New Section 3 provides that an S corporation or partnership may annually elect to be subject to tax at the entity level. Beginning on and after January 1st of 2022. The election is only allowed in a taxable year where the limitation on deductions allowed for individuals, where there is a limitation on deductions allowed to individuals under the Internal Revenue Code Section 164B6, and that was the amendment I was referencing. My understanding is that the limitation in the federal code limits that deduction to $10,000 for years 2018 through 2026 at the current time. New Section 4 provides that an electing pass-through entity shall be subject to tax in an amount equal to 5.7% of the sum of such electing pass-through entity owner's distributive share of the income attributable to the state. Credits. There's provisions relating to credits and how those would apply to the pass-through entity. The provisions of the State Income Tax Act regarding collection, administration, and enforcement of the tax would be applicable, and an electing pass-through entity would be considered a taxpayer. New Section 5 provides that the electing pass-through entity owners shall not be liable for the tax under this act. So it's the entity that would pay the tax, not the individuals. The new Section 6 authorizes the Secretary of Revenue to adopt rules and regulations necessary to carry out provisions of the act. Section 7 would amend KSA 793220 to include a provision that a non-resident individual or fiduciary whose only source of income from the state of Kansas is income from an electing pass-through entity under the Salt Parity Act would not be required to file a return. Section 8 would amend KSA 2021 sub 7932-117 relating to individuals. It would provide an addition modification in an amount equal to the electing pass-through entity owner's distributive share of the entity's losses attributable to the state that are taxed pursuant to this new act. And it would also provide a subtraction modification for the losses to be subtracted. And I also just want to note, if you've read through the bill, this particular section, this bill actually has a technical correction related to this statute. This particular Section 8 would reconcile the amendments that are found in KSA 2021 sub 7932-117Q. Last year, there were 2 bills that passed and became law that had amendments to this particular statute. And so we are trying to reconcile those back into one statute so that we don't have 2 statutes in the book. And just if someone's reading, those are the first-time homebuyer references that are in that.
Okay.
That show as new, but they are current law.
Yeah,
They're not new
I have a
provisions.
question. We do a reconciliation resolution. I'm surprised that didn't cover it, but we won't get into that now. We are out of time. We're going to lose the room. So the conferees online, Sean, Daniel, Rick, Brian, and Eric's in the room. Would you be able to join us at noon? Eric will.
This is Brian.
Yes, this is Brian. I can join it.
Brian's a yes.
Yeah, this is Sean Sullivan. I'm the yes.
Sean's a yes.
This is Jeff Farrell. I can attend at noon.
Jeff, great. Dan Murray and Rick.
This is Rick Najar, BKD LLP. Yes, I can attend at 12.
Okay, wonderful. We will continue this hearing at noon. Thank you, everyone. And the IT people, will it be the same link? It is the same link for noon, for WebEx. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
on Senate Bill 495 and let me make sure, 495 and committee, we're going to continue with that hearing. Our first conferee would be Sean Sullivan. Sean, are you online?
Yes, I'm online.
Would you like to proceed?
I would, thank you. Thank you, Senator Tyson, the committee members, for the opportunity to provide information on Senate Bill 495, applicable to changes allowing pass-through entities to elect to pay state income taxes at the entity level. I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Society of CPAs, the professional association representing over 2,000 certified public accountants in Kansas, and we would offer the following perspectives from our membership. So what are we trying to fix with this bill? It's basically that since the passage of the TCJA back in 2017, there have been 21 states that have enacted legislation to partially mitigate the $10,000 limit on individual state income tax deductions by allowing pass-through entities to elect to have state income taxes paid by the entity instead of by the individual owners. We feel that if Kansas doesn't enact this legislation to partially mitigate the limit, it raises some concerns. First being that state taxes paid by business entities like C corporations remain fully deductible, which results in a competitive disadvantage for the pass-through entities, businesses doing business as pass-through entities. Kansas business is at a competitive disadvantage to the states allowing taxing at the entity level instead of at the owner level. And then with our surrounding states enacting this legislation or similar legislation, including Oklahoma, Colorado, and Arkansas, this may encourage businesses to consider either locating there or relocating to those other states, and thus harming potentially the business environment in Kansas. So we see the bill as a solution. Under current Kansas law, pass-through entities such as S corporations, partnerships, and limited liability companies, the tax is paid at the individual shareholder level on their tax returns. And by allowing these entities to make an annual election to pay the state taxes at the entity level, it provides a number of benefits, which includes Kansas still collects the same amount of revenue, so it's revenue neutral, but the taxes are paid by the business entities rather than the individual owners. The owners, under the bill as currently drafted, exclude any income from the electing entities on their individual returns, so they're not subject to tax on the portion of the income that's included on the entity return. The entity has the ability to make the election annually each year, so in some cases, if they don't choose to do so, they have that option. It recognizes the value of similar credits paid by other states to pass-through owners. Non-residents, in theory, would not be required to file a Kansas return if their only source of Kansas revenue is from the entity that makes the election. And the effective date is such as proposed that there would be no requirement to amend tax returns. So I think it's very favorable in that regard. We do understand and recognize that, like any tax change, system programming changes will be needed in the state's income tax system. But we believe the benefits of potential economic growth may far outweigh the cost of making those changes. So elimination of the federal SALT cap should not have an impact on state revenues if the election continues. We are aware of some proposed amendments to the bill, and we have had an opportunity to work extensively on the amendments, and we have no objection to the amendments. I think we've got probably some additional testimony today in that regard from other parties. Both the bill as written and with the proposed amendments that we're aware of, we believe accomplish the desired results. So again, I would thank you in advance for supporting Senate Bill 495.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you,
Committee,
Sean. Committee, are
any questions?
any
It's difficult
questions?
with the
It's difficult
echo.
with the echo.
Seeing none, thank you, Sean. Our next conferee is Dan Murray. Dan, are you online, or does he still have a conflict? Okay. That's fine. Okay, thank you. Committee, I'll refer you to Dan's written testimony. Rick Najjar, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. And Jeff Farrell is either online.
Yes, Madam Chair, we're both online, and I will, if please, I'd like to address you and the committee with regard to Senate Bill 495.
That's wonderful. Would you state your name and position?
Yes, my name is Jeff Farrell. I'm a senior managing tax consultant in the SALT group at BKD.
Thank you, Jeff. You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to provide information on Senate Bill 495. The KSCPA expressed well in its testimony the necessary fixes for Kansas to remain on par with surrounding states. Senate Bill 495 will address these concerns, ensuring Kansas income taxes paid by business owners is deductible for federal income tax purposes and allowing a credit for taxes paid to other states that also have a pass-through entity regime. The credit for taxes paid is imperative to ensuring Kansas residents do not pay tax twice on income they have earned outside Kansas borders. In other words, the credit for taxes paid ensures a level playing field for Kansas residents who may be taxed on a portion of their income by another state. If Kansas residents suddenly found the credit for taxes paid unavailable due to the taxing regimes of other states, taxing income at the entity level rather than the individual level, this level playing field would surely be lost. The same tax paid to the same state would no longer be creditable because the tax is paid at the entity level rather than the individual level, all while the economic burden of the tax would remain with the Kansas resident. Without our proposed changes, Kansas residents would lose their credit for taxes paid due to nothing more than a change in the manner in which the tax is paid than a change to the substance of the tax itself. In addition to these changes, it is important to ensure Kansas businesses are able to access credits earned from increasing employment and investment in Kansas, whether or not they elect to be taxed at the entity level. Since the 1980s, credits like the High Performance Incentive Program have provided a crucial incentive for business to bring much-needed jobs to Kansas. However, these carefully crafted credits face a possible disruption. In its current proposed form, Senate Bill 495 would disallow any credits earned by a pass-through entity during a tax year where the entity made a pass-through entity election if the entity no longer qualifies for that election. As we have seen, the SALT cap is a highly debated topic in Congress. The future of the SALT cap is uncertain. If the SALT cap is later repealed and Kansas no longer offers the pass-through entity election, we suggest Senate Bill 495 provide for the ability to transfer any credits from the pass-through entity to its owners. We suggested changes to this end. These credits encourage investment in Kansas, and protecting their ability to be utilized will help further this goal. Thank you for the opportunity to help further support Kansas business under Senate Bill 495.
Committee, any questions? I have a quick one. We've handed out your suggested changes to the committee. And on page 11, page 15, 16, you're recommending deleting for taxable years commencing after December 31st, 2021. Those two statements, that section or area.
Yes, Madam.
Would you please address that as to why you're recommending that?
Yes, Madam.
Change?
Yes, be happy to. So, as previously drafted, the Senate bill utilized what I'll call a income subtraction mechanism by which to make sure the Kansas residents were not taxed twice. In our review of that draft, we felt that there were some potential issues that might not allow that to be upheld if challenged. So we suggested a credit for taxes paid regime that would not run into that issue. As a result, there's no longer needed these modifications to either subtract Kansas income that was already taxed or add back Kansas income that in the event of a loss. the income for the residents would have already been fully taxed at the entity level, and they'd be made whole by a credit for taxes paid on that income to Kansas.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Any questions online? Thank you, Jeff, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next is Brian Reardon. Are you online, Brian?
I am, Senator. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Brian Reardon. I run the S Corporation Association. We're a national trade group here in DC, and usually we focus on federal tax issues. But starting in 2017 with the implementation of the SALT cap, we began to work with state legislatures like yours to try to implement what we call the Salt Parity effort. Sean explained a little bit of it, but effectively what happened in 2017 with the SALT cap was, individual taxpayers, they're subject to the cap. C corporations, because they pay their tax at the entity level, are not subject to the cap. They can continue to deduct their state taxes as a business expense. And S corps and partnerships got stuck in the middle. So if, like in Kansas, your income flows through to the owners and they pay at the owner level, then their taxes are subject to the cap. If the entity pays the tax, then it's not. It's a business deduction, just like it always has been. So we, in 2018, began encouraging and working with states to enact what we call SALT parity, where you would give these owners an election to pay taxes at the entity level and therefore restore the deduction at the federal level. As Sean indicated, this is something where it's going to benefit thousands of S corps and partnerships in Kansas. It's not going to cost the state any revenue, so it makes your businesses and employers more competitive, all at no cost to the state. To date, 22 states have enacted this, including, as Sean indicated, some of the states around you, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Another 10, including your state, are considering it right now. Virginia, for instance, where I'm located, they just sent the bill to the governor this week, so they'll be the 23rd state to enact it. So this is something that of the 41 states where this would apply, we're getting close to having 2/3 of those states take action. I'm hopeful that you all will do as well. Many of the concerns that came up regarding this effort early on don't really apply anymore. So for instance, there was concern early on that the IRS was going to shoot this idea down, that they were going to, through regulation, make sure that it didn't work. They've done just the opposite. They issued a notice back in 2020 that said that not only did they think that this would work, but they were going to issue guidance to make it easier for states and for taxpayers to take advantage of this. So that's gone. There is concern that the federal government, they might repeal or somehow alter the SALT cap. That's still out there, although that legislation is currently stalled in the Senate. I do think that it's important for the committee to be aware that even if Congress does take action, it's not likely to fully repeal the SALT cap. And there would, even if it did, there would be still residual reasons why some companies might want to make this election so that they could get the 100% of the deduction, as opposed to in some cases they would get less if they took the deduction at the individual level. So this is something that is widely beneficial. Particularly lower income S corps and partnerships. If you have owners or partners who take the standard deduction, they can make this election, get the deduction as a business expense for their SALT taxes, and still take the standard deduction at the federal level. So even lower income businesses would benefit from this in Kansas and elsewhere. So really happy you guys are taking this on, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you for your testimony, Brian. Any questions, committee? Brian, are you in agreement with the amendments that have been suggested, or have you seen those?
I think I've seen some of them. I'm not sure about all of them. My understanding is that you base the bill on the Colorado law that was enacted last year, but that for a couple of reasons they're switching from an income exclusion to a tax credit. I think that makes perfect sense. In fact, in Colorado, there's legislation moving and should be enacted shortly to make that same change, because they were running into the same problem about timing and some other issues with the income exclusion. So I think it makes perfect sense to make those changes, yes.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Brian. Next is Eric Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Good afternoon. Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber. Appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 495. Yeah, everybody said everything that I would want to add, but I just want to thank all of those who worked to make this happen. I know the Society of CPAs and all of the tax professionals that have been heavily involved in this, and we've seen several reiterations over the last 3 months, including one last night. Yeah, we trust their judgment and direction as to what's best, and it sounds like the direction they're headed's the best one. So we appreciate all their work and be here to help however we can on it.
Thank you, Eric. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, I draw your attention to written testimony from Jason Watkins. Is there anybody else that would like to testify as a proponent? Any opponents testifying on the bill? Is there anybody that would like to testify neutral on the bill? Seeing none. Committee, I'm going to call on Amelia. She has a question for one of the conferees. Jeff, are you still available for questions?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question relating to the proposed amendment document that I believe, Jeff, I think you were, someone has provided to us. And the chair asked you a question regarding some stricken language, I think on page 11.
Yes, there's two on page 11 and then again.
And then again on 1516. Yes, I see that. And I just want to, I am the assistant revisor who assists the committee. And when I was looking through the bill draft, if you would turn to page 4, there's actually a reference to the one of those sections that are being stricken. There's a reference there in line 4 to 7932 117C 24, I think, and then it's referred to again in the next subsection. Would those, from a drafting perspective, since the that subsection, that paragraph is being stricken, would you recommend also that those two references be stricken?
Yes, I think that makes sense. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any other questions for any of the conferees? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 495. Committee, it was my intent to work some of these items. How many committee members do we have online? We don't have enough. Okay. You know what, committee, I'm going to open the hearing on, we have a hearing on another resolution. Yeah, I'm going to have that hearing real quick. It won't take 2 seconds. We don't have any conferees. So, Amelia, would you give us an overview of SCR 1619?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Concurrent Resolution number 1619 urges the legislature to adopt the conclusions and recommendations of the 2021 Special Committee on Taxation regarding the fiscal future of Kansas. The resolution would recommend that the legislature use state general fund ending balances and current receipts in excess of expenditures to pay down debt, and not for any increase to ongoing state expenditures. To consider constitutional amendment proposals restricting growth of government. Consider repealing all tax credits, exemptions, and abatements that are not currently being used and haven't been used for several years. Devise a system of taxation that is equal and fair across the spectrum of forms of energy production. Review Kansas income tax of retirement income. Evaluate the existing Kansas property tax circuit breaker systems defined as any property tax relief that limits or reduces taxes, and consider adding an additional program or expanding existing programs.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, are there any questions on this resolution? It is a joint resolution that was a result of an interim tax committee this summer. I think a majority of people are in agreement with it, and if there's no objection, no questions, I'll close the hearing on SCR 1619. And if there's no objection, we'll go ahead and work that really quickly. Committee, what are your wishes on Resolution 1619?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator Holland.
I'm sorry, just for clarification, I do like many of the themes expressed in the resolution, but technically the resolution is non-binding, correct?
It's non-binding. It's a recommendation.
Very good. Thank you.
Would you like to make a motion, Senator?
I think I'll let somebody else lead, but I'll be there with a second.
Okay. Committee, what are your wishes on the resolution? Senator Peck?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would move that the committee pass out Senate Concurrent Resolution 1619 favorably for passage.
It's been, Senator Holland, are you the second?
I will be the second. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. It's been moved by Senator Peck, seconded by Senator Holland. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Committee, I'll turn your attention to the other resolution, SCR 1620. Amelia, I don't know that we need an overview, but there were several questions for you. Would you be willing to take an attempt at, I know that was quick turnaround on the research, but we would be anxious to hear what you found out.
Certainly, Madam Chair. There were a couple questions, and I'll start with, and maybe I'm reframing the questions a little bit because I may not have written them down exactly how they were worded. So this is kind of just a general overview from my perspective and my opinion. The first question had to do with taxes and fees. I did find the case I was thinking about from the Kansas Supreme Court from a couple of years ago, the Heartland Apartment Association versus City of Mission case. And there is a distinction between a tax and a fee. And I would like to point out that this particular resolution refers to a tax, state taxes. The case itself talks about this distinction between taxes and fees, and specifically provides that, let me find where I was going to tell you that, that the court has recognized that a tax is a forced contribution to raise revenue for the maintenance of government services offered to the general public. The U.S. Supreme Court has defined tax as an enforced contribution to provide for the support of government. In contrast, a fee is incident to a voluntary act, which presumably bestows a benefit on the applicant not shared by other members of the society. It goes on to explain when you're looking at whether something is a tax or a fee, some of the questions that are asked is who is paying, who is benefiting, and what will the revenue be used for. And again, a tax is a forced contribution to pay for government's general services that benefit members of public at large, regardless of whether any particular person has paid the tax. And on the other hand, a fee is not a revenue measure. It is assessed against those who gain the exclusive benefit of the service, or if it's a regulatory fee, those that are subject to the regulation. In other words, an exaction is a fee when the benefits are not enjoyed by the public at large. Fees are voluntary in nature in that a person can decline to take advantage of the service or benefit. I mean, that was kind of part of the key of that particular case. Although something may be called a fee, it may not necessarily be a fee. And that's what was discussed in this particular case. And there may be ultimately gray areas, and a court may get involved at some point if that is very gray. I would say, in my opinion, based on the reading of this, the language of this resolution, it does specifically refer to tax, and it lists taxes and in the nature of a tax. And so I would argue fees are not included. If it's truly a fee, that a fee would not be subject to this provision. If it was truly a fee.
Unless we amend it.
Certainly, unless it were to be amended to include fee or some other term, yes.
That's wonderful. Thank
Okay.
you, Amelia.
And
go
I
ahead.
have one more response to Senator
We have a question first. Okay, Senator Solentrop.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Real quickly, this may be a extremely large example, but a voluntary act is the purchase of an electric vehicle. That's a voluntary act. You don't have to buy one. It's a voluntary act. So with that, if there is a fee assessed on that voluntary act to use our roadways, would we impose a $250 annual fee for that voluntary act to use hard surface roads in our state by the use of that vehicle?
Amelia?
Madam Chair, I don't need an answer
I
now.
think
Just, again, that was the biggest opposition we've heard so far about this bill in particular, and it's really the only one that I can kind of identify as a little bit of a problem for certain people. So you don't have to give me an answer right now. It's just a question. Thank you.
Okay, we can discuss that too when we, Senator Peck, or Amelia, would you want to give the response to Senator Peck's question? Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senator Peck had a question earlier regarding a veto by the governor. If this were to become part of our Constitution, and I believe in the example, there was a bill that would be subject to the provision I'm restating this poorly, probably. You're much more eloquent. If the bill passed with the 2/3 majority, went to the governor's desk, and the governor were to veto the bill, yes, it would come back to the legislature under Article 2, just like any other bill, and be subject to another 2/3 majority provision under Article 2 regarding override of vetoes. And if the votes were in the affirmative did not reach that supermajority, then the motion to override the veto would fail.
Senator Peck, does that answer your question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, it does. That was my reading and understanding, but I wanted clarification from someone who was more eloquent than myself.
Thank you. And Senator Solentrop, do you feel comfortable with the current language? And not to put you on the spot, but since we are debating the resolution. Committee, what are your wishes on the resolution? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is something that I have wanted to see the legislature pass since I first heard of the idea back around 2003, 2004. So I am pleased that we are having this resolution presented to this committee and having the opportunity to work the bill, and hopefully it would make it through the process. So having given it my personal stamp of approval, I would move that the Senate Assessment and Taxation Committee pass out Senate Concurrent Resolution 1620, favorable for passage. Placed on the consent calendar. I'm kidding.
That's good. The motion's before us. It's been moved by Senator Peck, seconded by Senator Solentrop. Discussion on the motion.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really shocked, Madam Chair, the committee has decided to move forward working this bill. I thought Senator Solentrop raised an excellent question about what is the definition of a tax increase. I know we kind of maybe drilled down on some things that relates to how to, funding our highways through as motor fuels taxes, whatever, shrivel up and we transfer to different forms of vehicles. But I'm really, really disappointed in this committee if this decides to vote this out today. A couple things real quick, Madam Chair. Number one, this legislation is incredibly broad sweeping. I still don't know the definition of what is a tax increase. In my mind, the committee should have looked at various types of tax and fee examples to determine if those would have fallen into this. We have failed to do that. Number two, my concern with this bill is that, quite honestly, the budgeting committee mechanism never had a chance to weigh in on this. This is my real concern with Kansas processes, is that, if we're running government like a business, we all prefer we want to, having a tax committee charge off and go down this path and put this, basically shackle our budgeting committee with this, to me is inane. My third complaint with this is basically undemocratic legislation. It basically licenses the legislature to pass just monster corporate and business tax cuts and basically transfer over time the tax burden to citizens who don't have the lobbyists to come before and talk about why this stuff is so good. I'm disappointed in the committee. I'll be voting no. I want to be recorded as a no vote. And this bill is not only dangerous, but now it has devolved into stupidity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other discussion on the resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay.
No.
No.
Would you, Senator Holland would like to be recorded? Would Senator Corson like to be recorded also?
I would, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Committee, motion carries. Committee, I did intend to work other legislation today. However, I did not realize there is another committee meeting at 1 a.m. or 1 p.m. That's how I feel, 1 a.m. 1 p.m. and we did not get the room back as scheduled. So we are short on time. I'm hoping that leadership will help us navigate next week so that we are able to complete our work committee, because we have a heavy lift next week. We are meeting Monday, committee. Thank you for the reminder. In fact, let me make that announcement now. We will be sending out in an email, and we will be in this room at 9:30 Monday. We will have a hearing on Senate Bill 556, Senate Bill 554, and Senate Bill 319. And then we will take possible action on bills previously heard. We are almost to the end of session. You guys know how diligent it is and how much work will be before us. On Tuesday, we have Senate Bill 374 scheduled for hearing. On Wednesday, scheduled 553 for a hearing. Thursday, we will have hearings on Thursday, and we will be working Friday, committee. It is a full week. So I appreciate your diligence in being here today, especially with such well, I think it's beautiful weather, but not everybody will agree. So thank you, committee. Thank you for your work today. We're adjourned.